The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Stephen Dixon. I'm David Lane, a librarian at the Minnetonka Community Library. Mr. Dixon has recently published the book Interstate, a collection of 8 vignettes, mostly based around the experiences of a father, Mr. Frey, and his 2 daughters as they're driving on the interstate and experience a senseless and fairly brutal murder. I have a couple questions for you that sort of focus on that. The writing style to me was, it was exhausting and sometimes so incessant that I felt like telling Mr. Frey to just shut up and drive for a few minutes without thinking. A couple of questions came to mind in this regard. I found the book extremely difficult to read, both in subject matter and in writing style. At one point I had to assign myself pages a day to read in order to finish it, and I'm not sure I would have finished it had it not been for this interview today. So I guess my first question is, what readers' reactions would you consider most satisfying?
Well, first of all, that's a hell of an endorsement for the book. I'm sure everybody who has heard that will give their book back to the bookstore they bought it at if they did. But what was the question now?
Well, the question was, what I'm assuming my reaction is not
your
the
reaction
you intended.
Is, so far, from what I can understand, atypical. People have told me that it is. I mean, I know I wrote a very intense book, and I meant to write an intense book because it's a very intense subject. I don't know why you couldn't stick with it. People have told me that they couldn't put it down, or that they couldn't put it down because of the subject matter. The style is my own style. It's not the traditional style that other writers work with. I've always worked on style as well as story. Subject is as important to me as style, and vice versa, of course. I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I could understand why somebody would have reservations about the book, because what I do in this book is to make the family, I feel, so alive that the reader will share the loss as deeply as the father in the novel.
Right.
And I get very, very deep into his thoughts because it is a car ride. And I purposely made it a car ride, not just to have the little girl shot at in a car by some madman on the road who does this for absolutely no reason. But to put the father in the front seat and the girls in the back. And so the girls could sleep, they could play games. He's on the road between New York and Baltimore, or any interstate, really. It's a universal interstate. And he's left with his thoughts because he can't find any classical music, and classical music is an important point, you know, that he's a very serious, thoughtful fellow. And so he's left with his thoughts.
Right.
And the thoughts are of a man sort of recapitulating his life, and thinking about loss and occasionally engaging his daughters in conversation to pass the time. I mean, it's supposed to be a 4-hour trip, and which can be tedious, but the book is not supposed to be tedious.
It wasn't tedious. No, it wasn't tedious. It was difficult for me. One reason, and this is, I should say this so it's understood that it's my perspective. I have an intense fear of death and the inevitability of death, primarily. And actually, it's one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is what your feelings about death are, because that is a central theme in the book.
My feelings about death are, if I was living alone, I would accept it. Not gladly, but accept it, since I'm 59 years old now, just 59, and I've lived a full life. I've written 17 books. Another one is coming out. I'll probably have 20 by the time I die, or 25. Even if I died in a couple of years. But my feelings of death changed when I had 2 daughters and a wife to take care of. And the daughters are now 9 and 12, and I would hate like hell to go before the daughters are grown up. And not only because they would miss me so much, and it would be an experience for them that would be so traumatic that it would really alter their lives, if not flatten it somewhat. But I also want to see what they're going to become. I'm very intensely interested in seeing what all this that I brought, that I've put into them, my wife has put into them, and also just the idea of having them materialize into adults and what work they're going to do. It all is very important to me to live long enough to see that, not to see grandchildren, you know, but just to see my girls, you know, as adults and old enough to take care of themselves. Then I will disappear. I mean, not gladly again, but with less reservations than I have now.
So was it difficult for you to write these stories in which it's almost autobiographical?
This novel,
he has two children of roughly the same age span, same geographical area. Was it scary to write?
Well, that's a two-part question almost. I mean, in other words, it was the most difficult book I've ever written, only because it was it's such an emotional book. All my writing is emotional. I mean, be the emotion humor or tragedy, but this was the most emotional book, and many times during it, and I wrote it obsessively for 2 straight years. I mean, it was 698 manuscript pages, full manuscript pages, and as you see, there's no linear dialogue. All the dialogue is run on. I mean, another writer would be 800 pages, and because it would be opened, and the book is really, you know, tight. It's just, it was, at times I got up and walked away from my typewriter, a little manual, and said, I can't go on with the book. I mean, it's just, I was crying when I was writing it so many times.
Actually, one question that I wasn't even asked because it seemed almost silly was the practicality of writing it. Not the dialogue, the text is so constant. And the thoughts, it's almost as if you're recreating his thoughts as he's having them in the car. And I couldn't imagine getting those words down fast enough to keep the train of thought in your mind as you wrote it. So I assumed you must have been really fast with the word processor. And then in
I don't
one
have
of
a
the
word processor.
I know you have an old Hermes typewriter.
That's right.
So how did you do it technically?
Well, the process in everything that I write is, first of all, to write only one thing at a time, one short story, one novel. And then I write either a short story first draft in about an hour, and then I spend a month or 2 on it, rewriting it, maybe 30, 40 times, but page by page, 30, 40 times. Or a novel, I just do one paragraph at a time. And that's why this book is all big, solid paragraphs. And sometimes those 5-page paragraphs in first draft will turn into 80-page paragraphs, which of course, you know, that's another thing that will turn readers off. I know that my writing is untraditional, and that the reviewers so far have been very positive about it, but they're practiced readers. But other people, you know, might look at it and think that, you know, this is not what they're used to, and they might even be afraid of it, afraid of tackling it. Well, you could say the same thing about Dante's Inferno and Joyce's Ulysses and Eliot's The Wasteland. I mean, it doesn't look like poetry or epics or novels should. And neither does my work. But this is the only way I could work, because otherwise writing would be unattractive and tedious and truly uneventful for me. I always have to change my style and build from the previous work with each new work, be it a short story or novel. But getting back to my 2 daughters, why I did make them the same ages as my daughters. My daughters are now 9 and 12, Antonia and Sophia, and they were 6 and 9 when I started the book. You see, I started the book 3 years ago, and it was up 2 years, and it took a year for it to come out. It just came out in May 1995. I did that. I took my girls, and I even took the physical resemblances to my girls, and the way they talk, because I wanted the book to be as close as possible, because I wanted the book to be an act of empathy. I wanted to I didn't want to project their deaths, and one dies in most of the scenes, but the other one dies in another. But I wanted it to be felt, and I just, and many times the imagination could make things felt, but this time I wanted to go much, much deeper than that. And sort of like an actor on stage, I wanted to, I used them to feel the loss that the character Nathan Frey does in the book.
In the stories where Julie dies, she dies quickly.
2.5 pages.
Almost instantly, as far as being shot, and they look back and she's apparently dead almost instantly. Was that, I was wondering if it was your intent, so that you didn't have to write about, you know, the process of her actually dying. She's there one moment, next moment a bullet comes through the windshield and she's dead. Well,
it's different in subsequent interstates, and there's sort of interstate and interstate 2 and 3 and 4. I did that because one of my techniques is to sort of start where other writers leave off. And I just wanted to get the act over with and then to show the consequences and repercussions of that act. And that's what the book is really about, the consequences and repercussions of a senseless murder. And the consequences on the oldest daughter, and the consequences on the father. And although you never meet the mother except in retrospect, I mean, he spends maybe 30 pages thinking how he's going to call his wife and tell her. And how would one call his wife and tell her, or vice versa? How would a wife call a husband and say, our daughter's dead? It's, I took the most unthinkable, impossible situation. Because this is what happens. I mean, there are so many victims in this world. The worst things possibly happen. I think the worst thing that can possibly happen is a senseless murder of a child, be it in Sarajevo or in the streets of Minneapolis, Baltimore, and New York. And that's what I did. I wanted to think about the unthinkable, because I don't think that that's thought about too much. Or written about.
So we have time. I want you to read a passage, because that'll give the best insight into. I like this passage. This is a scene in Interstate 4 where Nathan is with his children in FAO Schwartz, and he's lecturing them about safety and dealing with strangers. And I like it because I thought it gave good insight into your writing style as well as into Nathan's personality.
And right after this scene is when there's a shooting too, you see. So what this scene is supposed to do is say that no matter how much the father prepares his children for possible terrible acts by other people, there's only so much that you could do to protect your children. That's another theme in the story. And this is a comical scene too, I thought. A hello, a hi, a wave, or nice talk beyond just greeting talk between you and them, and even between them and mommy and me, which you've seen. And they've acted nice to you up till now, but suddenly are acting peculiar or asking you to do peculiar things, or just things you know you're not supposed to do, like going alone with them to places I've told you not to go, a basement, park, car, garage, someone's home, or their own. Now, if you hit these neighbors in defending yourself or trying to get away, and it's by chance a mistake, they'll have to understand that it was done because I'm told to protect yourself. I told you to protect yourself this way, and that there was a misinterpretation, an error in understanding, just a problem in what they were giving off with their words or actions or looks, and what you took in, and that perhaps I also might have been too strong in my warnings to you and what to do. Still, you've got to do what I say. This is how things have become today, I'm afraid. I'm almost sure of it. In being extra cautious, you might occasionally go too far, but better that way than not going far enough where you didn't defend yourself when you could have and got hurt or didn't do enough to get away. I'm sure Mommy will agree with me on this, but we'll ask her. If she doesn't, then that's going to cause some conflict, because I'm going to insist you do everything you can to protect and defend yourselves against people who might want to hurt you. And in fact, I'm going to spend a little time with you soon, teaching you how. Just kicks and where to hit and stuff, but more than I just did. Let's hope, of course, this will never happen. And chances of it happening have got to be 1 in a few thousand, 100,000. Most people are good and wouldn't touch you, so 1 in a million, or maybe less. But we also have to hope that a neighbor or anyone doesn't get a heart attack or stroke or fall and break a limb as a result of a blow from one of you. That is, if he or she didn't mean anything awful toward you, and it was a mistake on their part or yours, in judgment or perception, how you see things, or whatever. If it wasn't a mistake, then truthfully, I wouldn't care if they tripped and fell in front of a passing car. I shouldn't say that, perhaps, but I think people who do things like that to kids are among the worst and deserve what they get. Okay, maybe that's too harsh, so something also that shouldn't have been said, but in a nutshell, you don't go with anyone, any place, child or adult, without our permission.
Thanks. One thing that about Mr. Frey, that the way that I related to him, was he seemed, on the one hand, his love for Margot and Julie was very, very sincere and very strong. On the other hand, he seemed like a bit of a schmuck sometimes. He punched some guy out in college for no apparent reason. He's temperamental with his children. And for me, the result that I had trouble being empathetic with him and felt more like a third-party observer. So when the tragedy occurred, I didn't know how to react.
See, but you didn't get my point. And the point of the book was to show about Nathan Frey that he has his flaws and foibles, that he is not perfect, that as a young man, he once punched a guy in the nose without reason, although after it he was guilty. He felt guilty about it. I didn't want to show a perfect man. I wanted to show that this violence is in us all, but he had this violence when he was young. He's still quite flawed as an adult, but he would never be somebody who would do anything near to what that guy did to his daughter, or what he imagines somebody could do to his daughter. That's why I wanted to sort of make a very round, solid character. Yes, he's a bit of a schmo. All my characters are schmoes. I always write about guys who are losers or flawed, because the perfect guys, that's for other writers in their books. I don't write about those people. I write about the people who I think are more human, because everybody has flaws.
Right. How about his relationship to his children? Can you talk about that as far as...
Well, he's overcautious. He's overcautious. But in the course of the book, I mean, it seems that, no matter how cautious he would be, I mean, that there are random acts of violence. So there's some truth to his being extra cautious. And, we see what we read in the newspapers, that everybody has to be careful about their children. He's of many minds. And that's why it is also called interstate, because his mind is running from one state of mind to the next. And sometimes he's harsh. And even there are scenes in the book where he tells himself, that's the last time I'm going to act untoward to my kids. I want to start a new leaf with them. And he makes all sorts of promises to himself, but to show how flawed he is, then he argues with them again, or he yells at them again. I mean, so there are things in himself that during this trip he works out. Now, the last scene is the beautiful scene, I think, because meaning that that's where no accident or killing happens. I don't want to give it away to the reader, but it's a tender scene, and it's there to show the better moments in his relationship with his children, and perhaps it's so sort of sweet, almost Victorian-like in its sweetness, that perhaps he did learn something from the car trip that day.
I see. So it's an alternate sort of vision of his relationship with his children.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that scene, and my bias, which is very apparent, I'm sure already, is I want the world to be idealistic.
Yeah.
And so that's why the book was so difficult for me to read. And so one reaction I had was, why not have 6 idyllic, almost Victorian scenes and just have one car wreck?
It wouldn't have been as interesting. Then I couldn't have... See, the book gets deeper and deeper and deeper with every interstate, until I'm finally zeroing in on scenes that in the beginning took a page or two, and in the middle and near the end take 30, 40 pages to explain, because he gets deeper and deeper, while also getting closer and closer with each interstate to safety, which is Baltimore and his home, until he finally arrives there. I mean, there's a method, and a reason behind this madness, and I spent, as I say, 2 obsessive, thought-filled years thinking about all this. Structure is very important, and a good book should be layered, I think, and not just flat out there. And I've layered it, and it's up to the reader to peel away the layers.
Is that why it starts out, why the first story covers the whole span of his life, and
that's right. The first interstate is a novella, and we never get, and it's really 30 years of the man's life. Almost 30 after his daughter is shot on the road. And that's supposed to show sort of it's supposed to be quick, and that's sort of the Hollywood version of Interstate, the first 68 pages. And it's supposed to also show the complete flattening of the man, and how this one incident has destroyed him, and then and also to show his obsession in trying to find the killers. And even though he finds 2 guys, they might not be the killers, and he's thrown into prison and loses everything because of it, his wife and his second child, his first child.
Although, for him personally, he never regretted that.
He changes his profession. It's really a different man almost. In the beginning, he's a dental technician, and later on, he sort of has an office job. So it's as if it's a different man. And he is supposed to be a multi-faceted person who is also maybe of different personalities. He might even be many men. You see, that's how I universalize a character. No, he doesn't regret it, because he's a different kind of person. But I think that's a justification. I think underneath, we later find out that he might regret it. But in that particular chapter, he doesn't regret it. Because he's lost everything. So if he could get his daughter back, or even his oldest daughter back, who's living in that chapter, he might then have regretted what he did to those guys. But he's a stubborn guy in the beginning. And less stubborn as he goes along.
Right. One thing that I liked was how race remained ambiguous throughout the book. I caught myself, to my own fault, assuming that the victims were white and the drive-by killers were black, and I switched their races and found that to be just as consistent. I was wondering if you intended that to be ambiguous.
Yes, I did. I never bring up race in a book or a story. I try to universalize it that way, and it's purposefully ambiguous. He even mentions in one scene, I don't know, they're white, black, I'm almost sure that they're not Asian American, but I don't know for sure.
Right, right.
That's to show that anybody is capable of these crimes, and to sort of demythologize the idea that it's just one or two racial or ethnic groups that commit these crimes. Everybody does it. Or I should say every group has people in it who are terrible. One of the stories it reminded me of was the story by Raymond Carver called "Tell the Women We're Going," which is a story in which two men pass two women cyclists and end up near at the end of the story, apparently bludgeoning them to death. I'm not familiar with the story. I'm only familiar with a few Raymond Carver stories.
I was curious as to what you thought of Raymond Carver, and because he also sort of focuses on the blue collar sort of everyman.
Yeah. Well. To say anything bad about Raymond Carver now would be a disservice to Carver, and probably a disservice to the person saying it, since he's been raised to almost cult status.
Right.
I won't even chance it. I have found some stories a bit cruel and cold, and so the opposite of my stories. My stories, I think, are much more compassionate than Carver's stories.
How so?
Well, I don't have stories where two people fight over a child, even if it's trying to make an obscure point and tearing the child in half.
Although a child does get shot in the upper chest and killed instantly in
yes,
six of them.
yeah, but to me that's to show the horror and the hellishness of a child's death. But he did it in his story. I forgot the name of it. This sort of Solomonic story where, well, we'll decide by pulling the child to pieces. It's like a joke. I found that to be a cruel and cold joke.
Right.
And so, I mean, he was a very capable writer, but I'll be honest, I don't think he was as good as writer as most people say. A better writer would be John Cheever, who's deeper, and more intelligent, and perhaps even a better stylist, while Carver's style seemed to have emanated from Hemingway's to the point of almost parody.
I see. What authors do you like?
Oh, everybody who is a good, serious writer and who, for his time, did new things. Everybody from the writers, the unknown writers of the Bible, and Dante, and I'm reading now Ovid's Metamorphosis. I think Homer is I mean, if he wrote his books today, he'd be a new genius. And then, but we could quickly shoot to Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. Tolstoy being, having written War and Peace, I think the greatest novel ever written. Dostoevsky was an early influence because of his subject matter. He was so deep and bloody and violent and meaningful. And then to Hemingway, whose style I had to erase when I started writing in my early 20s. And Joyce, who was great, and Kafka and Beckett and Nabokov. These are some of the greats. And American writers, Flannery O'Connor, probably the worst literary tragedy in America in this century, because she died so early when she showed so much promise and fulfillment. Those are, to me, the great writers. Today, I think the greatest writer is Garcia Marquez.
Right. I do like him. The short stories are something that I like. And actually, your novel, Interstate, although it's a novel, I found myself reading it, initially at least, as short stories. And you've written a lot of short stories.
Yeah, 500 of them.
Yeah. Do you prefer that? How is the experience of writing a novel? I know you've written Frog, which was critically acclaimed as a novel. Well, previously.
Frog, though, has about 50, 60 stories in it. In other words, there were 16 actual stories in it, and then each novel, then there are 2 novels in the novel, and each novel is broken down into novellas, and in those novellas are short stories. And then I have novellas in Frog, which are also composed of short stories, something I worked on pretty hard to get. I love both the story and the novel. The novel is great because if I'm working on it, I could work on it in a year, or as for Frog, 5.5 years, for Interstate, 2 years. A short story is, it comes and goes. I mean, I could finish one in a week, I could finish one in a month. I write them each as intensely and devotedly and conscientiously as I do. I mean, either one, no matter what I'm writing on, I just throw my entire self in it. So the short story is fine because, you have a finished piece of fiction in a week or a month, while the novel you're sort of holding out for a year or 5.5 years.
Yeah.
But as long as both grab me and hold me, they're equal. For as far as marketing, certainly a novel is better to sell to a publisher than a story, naturally, and booksellers would prefer novels to short stories. But I can't let the market dictate what I'm going to write. I write what moves me.
Right. How about your family is obviously very important to you, and your daughters especially. What was the experience of being absorbed in this novel and having a family? I have enough trouble going to work and coming home and mowing the lawn.
Well, I don't mow the lawn. I let it grow. There are some things that I have to let go. My kids objected a little during the summer when we went to Maine for 2 summers when I was writing this book, and I truly didn't pay as much attention as they wanted me to. But I had to finish the book. It was, as I say, it just overwhelmed me. But I'm able to do all 3 things. Teach. I teach a full load for a whole year. I mean, for 8 months. I work. I get all my other household duties done. Not mowing the lawn, but trimming the bushes and taking the garbage out and things like that. I take care of my kids. I'm a devoted father, and then when all the other things are out of the way, then I'm able to write free and clearly.
Oh, I see.
That's how I do it. I get everything out because I don't want any thought to interfere with any outside thought to interfere with my work. See, so that's so I get 10 minutes. I get 2 hours, or 8 hours, whatever I've managed to make for myself.
Right. In one of the publisher's press releases I was reading, it mentioned that the Poets and Writers Review, that the Paris Review gave you the John Train Humor Award.
Sure.
And I was wondering if you could mention some of your humorous short stories for me.
Oh, most of them
I've been
are.
afraid to start your book of short stories.
The funniest story in here is probably eating the placenta.
Okay.
And then there's Goodbye to Goodbye. There's, there are 6. This is composed of 60 stories from 12 collections. Man of Love. I mean, maybe half of them. Mac in Love. I mean,
So
there's
just
always
dive in.
Yeah, there's always some bittersweetness in my stories, and sometimes I'm able to mix not so much tragedy and comedy, but seriousness. And I write a serious comical story. Love Has Its Own Action is hilarious. The Intruder is brutal.
Well, I'll start
Streets
with that one.
is brutal and funny.
Okay.
They're all, but I would say the funniest is eating the placenta. That's sort of a out. That's where you would laugh out loud.
Okay.
Well,
I'll start
maybe not
with
you, maybe not others, but but it's certainly that one won't stop you.
Okay, that's great. Well, my guest has been Stephen Dixon, author of Interstate, previously of Frog, and over 500 short stories.
Well, I've published 400 plus stories, but I've written 517 novels.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very
for
much.
Joining us.
My pleasure.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.